first is to say that today the Select Committee of Parliament to look at the Integrity and Public Life Bill completed its work. You will know that last year we laid a completely new Integrity and Public Life Bill before Parliament, and we immediately went to Select Committee so that we would have the benefit of the input from interest groups and so on. I think the public will know that corruption has been a major issue in Barbados in recent times, and putting in place a strong and positive legislative framework has been at the forefront of our government's stance on the issue. We completed our work, our actual deliberations, in December of last year. So it has taken us a year to get to this point. In that year, though, much work has gone on behind the scenes, but we've had one or two administrative challenges. The work of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel office in my chambers, and those are the people who actually draft the legislation, they've had a vast amount of work to do, and in many instances our priorities based on our international commitments and other things shifted from time to time, and that has not been a bad thing in this context, because it has allowed us the opportunity to work on honing and crafting a much better piece of legislation. Of course, World Corruption Day is the 9th of December, and it was our earnest hope that by World Corruption Day we would have been able to have this bill back in Parliament. That is not going to be possible, but now that we've completed our report, we will be able to lay this report and the new bill in Parliament when next Parliament meets. That will be the 17th of December. So at the next sitting of Parliament, the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Integrity and Public Life Bill will be laid together with the finished new bill. And I'd like publicly to thank all of the individuals who participated in our deliberations. They put a lot of effort into it, and I think it's been a breath of fresh air. The way in which the public has accepted our various invitations to comment on legislation, and the openness with which we've conducted our business. We saw the same kind of thing in relation to the medicinal cannabis. People came forward quite willingly and participated, and it has been it's not a new way of doing things, but it's certainly been a good feeling for me as a legislator, a parliamentarian, to be engaging with the public in this open and frank way. In addition to that, I'd like to say that we're in the process of asking Cabinet for its permission to sign the UN Convention on Corruption. You may be aware that there are only 2 countries in the world that have not yet signed that convention: Barbados and Syria. And that's not the kind of company that Barbados is keeping. And therefore, we will be making all efforts as a partner to going back to Parliament on the 17th with our new and finished bill. We expect to be able to sign off on the UN Corruption Convention hopefully before the end of this year. The other matter that I want to speak with you on Wednesday, in various media houses, a notice would have appeared, published, a paid advertisement in the press would have appeared in relation to charities. Barbados has over 1,400 charities, and that speaks positively about the altruistic nature of Barbadians and the desire to help their fellow man, to help in various national causes and so on. But unfortunately, we're living in a new world now. We're living in a world where it is vital that we pay careful attention to the scourge of money laundering and terrorism financing. Charities, by their very nature, because there's not a lot of corporate governance and so on relating to them, are considered to be high-risk vehicles for money laundering and financing of terrorism. This is not a Barbados position. The Financial Action Task Force is the international standard setting body for these issues, and Barbados participates actively in those fora through a Caribbean Financial Action Task Force headquartered in Trinidad. Basically, all of the countries across the world are expected to meet certain minimum standards to demonstrate that we are serious about fighting money laundering and fighting terrorism. If a country does not meet those standards, they will effectively be blacklisted in the international arena. Now, the significance of this is that blacklisting would likely result in the loss of correspondent banking privileges to Barbadian financial institutions. Put a simple way, when a Barbadian wants to send money overseas to pay his child's school fees, to purchase something on Amazon, to buy medication, when the government of Barbados wants to pay its bills, when a business in Barbados wants to import commodities, it requires a transaction from the local bank to a foreign bank. Correspondent banking is what connects the two. In an environment where a correspondent bank is not satisfied that a jurisdiction is serious about fighting money laundering, what would happen is that they will deny correspondent banking privileges from the local bank. So basically, they will refuse to accept a transaction from the local bank. Now, this is not idle conjecture. In the last few years, the Caribbean region, just a few years ago, the Caribbean region had as many as 120 correspondent banks. That figure is now under 15. So international banks who would ordinarily do transactions between our banks and their banks, wherever they are taking seriously the issue of whether our jurisdictions in the region are adequately dealing with money laundering and terrorism financing. Now, as I've said before, charities are considered to be a high-risk vehicle. The fact of the matter is that we don't consider that of our 1,400 plus charities, that probably any of them are going to be used as a vehicle, but we have to be in a position to defend our level of supervision. Now, the fact is, since our Charities Act was passed in 1979, a lot of the requirements of our Charities Act have not been met. Charities are required to maintain books of accounts, and they're required to actually file balance sheets and so on with the company's registry. But like many things, it's never happened. In an effort to bring, first of all, an understanding of how many of our charities are still functioning, and also to try to get those charities to this place in the new world order, really, where they have to start taking seriously filing of returns and so on. The Corporate Affairs Department embarked on an outreach program. Now, the first limb of that outreach program was to write to every single charity in Barbados in August. Every charity was written in August, sending them a survey and asking them to comply with the survey. In that first round, less than 100 of the 1,400 responded. Another round of letters were sent out to these charities in September. And in that second round of outreach, a similarly small number responded. We are constantly under the scrutiny of the international organizations, and it is therefore important for us to demonstrate an effective supervisory regime. And as a result of that, as a result of being required to demonstrate an adequate supervisory regime, the corporate registry has had to reach out to all of the charities in Barbados and say to them, we need you to comply. Now, of course, I recognize that the directive that if you fail to respond within 7 days, you'll be struck off is of course it would appear quite draconian. We hope not to have to strike off any charities. And the first thing I will say is that as an administrative measure, we want all of the people who've been written to respond to the survey. This is just about gathering information. So please, first of all, respond to the survey. In relation to the request for financial statements, while I cannot tell you that we can float the law, because the law says you're required to keep it, you're required to maintain financial statements, as an administrative measure, we will only be requiring that going forward for 2018. Some charities have been in place for 5, 10, 15 years. And the truth is, we know that they operate on shoestring budgets and don't have the resources to hire accountants and so on. So we're not going to we're not going to impose that obligation on them in this way. So in a sense, we're going to declare an administrative amnesty prior to 2018. Please have your records for 2018, and going forward, you will in fact be required to comply. So what we are simply trying to say is that we need, given what is happening in the international arena, given the risks to our correspondent banking relationships, given the importance of having a modern supervisory regime, we simply have to have more information from charities, and gone are the days when you can just set up a charity and leave it. Nobody hears from you again. That is not the environment that we're operating in. So we don't want to scare anyone. The deadline is not going to be rigidly followed. We want you to comply, but in terms of the action of striking off, we're going to stay our hand in that regard, and this information has been communicated to the company's registry. We're going to stay our hand in respect of the requirement to produce filings from the date, balance sheets and financial records from the date of your establishment, but going forward, we do want to ask that all individuals who have charities work with the agencies and try to ensure that they stay current. We recognize that in Barbados today, in many respects, we've lost that old attitude of being our brother's keeper, and we are often seen as a more callous and uncaring society as compared to how we were before. These charities, all 1,400 of them, represent a strong indication that people in Barbados are still very keen on reaching out and lending a helping hand. And as far as the government is concerned, it is important for us, while we balance the challenges with money laundering, it's important for us to support these kinds of grassroots organizations in their work. So I apologize that there's been any alarm, but it is important for me to reiterate that in the fight against money laundering and in the thrust to maintain our normal banking relationships, all institutions are subject now to a higher level of supervision and scrutiny than they were before. And we're looking at charities because charities represent internationally a high-risk element, and it's for that reason that we are dealing with them in this way.
All right. Thank you very much. I just want to add a few words to what the Attorney General would have explained earlier. The first one is to say to the public, one of the areas of concern was that those charities that were listed in the advertisement had done something maybe unethical. And I know that there are some charities who are concerned, or whose principals are concerned, that the image has gone abroad, that they are not institutions and organizations that people should continue to support. I think the Attorney General was quite clear that the listing had nothing to do with that aspect of the operation of the charity, or of these charitable organizations, but rather the effort that we have to make to have compliance in terms of ensuring that we adhere to the rules that have been set in the international arena. The second thing I want to say is that this government is totally committed to the third sector, charities, NGOs, CSOs, TSOs, however you refer to them. And we have gone as far as to make sure that there is a ministry responsible for relations with the third sector. And that ministry is a Ministry of Labour and Social Partnership Relations. And so our commitment is there. We recognize that there are some charitable organizations, some NGOs, some community-based organizations, CBOs, some other civil society organizations that do not have the capacity that they want to have. Many of these organizations have been formed by people who are passionate about the areas that they have dedicated themselves to serving, as AG said, our brothers and sisters. They're very passionate. AG spoke to shoestring budgets. Many of them have passion but are lacking in other areas. Our government is committed to assisting third sector organizations in lifting their levels of the capacity, both in terms of actual governance of their organizations, capacity in terms of their financial management, capacity building in terms of their human resource management practices and their industrial relations practices, capacity building in terms of writing proposals for funding, capacity building in terms of the social enterprises that some of them could get involved in order to sustain themselves financially. We recognize that there are lots of areas of weakness, not just in terms of preparing financial statements and responding to surveys, which are things that have to happen, but other weaknesses in terms of their general administration. We want to reiterate to all third sector organizations, we commend the effort that goes into keeping many of these organizations alive, afloat, and functioning. We recognize that that passion is not a passion that a government can replicate. We also recognize that government cannot do everything in a society to take care of all the needs. And so third sector organizations are vital if our people are to be taken care of in a holistic way, and if people are not to fall through the cracks. So our commitment is there. I want to say that my ministry is going to be, well, we have already reached out to the UN system and the Inter-American Development Bank to, before the end of the financial year, government's financial year, to start the process of capacity building so that we will be having some kind of capacity building exercise to assist the third sector, civil society organizations, in helping them to get to the point where they're functioning in what we may term a very professional way. As it relates to compliance with the matters that the Attorney General would have spoken to, as we discuss this as a government and as a cabinet, we are going to be making provisions for assisting those organizations who may desperately need assistance. We have limited resources, but we believe that those who really need assistance in preparing the one or two financial statements for the 1 or 2 financial years, that we want to put ourselves in a position where we can assist. So we're asking charities, third sector organizations to comply because we have to, they have to. We are a nation, and we've always prided ourselves as being governed by law, by rules, and adhering to those. We also understand that we may have to give some assistance, and one of the main areas of assistance is the preparation of financial statements. I know as an accountant that that's an area where people get a little jittery because most people don't know how to do it, but we are going to be making resources available to assist. We will make that public, I believe, maybe early next week in terms of how it will happen. But I think I can at this point say that if there are charities listed who believe that they need assistance, as they reply to the survey, they can indicate that as well so that we become aware of it. The registrar then will probably pass that information to my ministry, and we'll be able to take it from there. But we just want to restate government's commitment to this sector even as we say to the country that we're also committed to good governance and the rule of law, and ensuring that we are not complicit or participants in money laundering, funding terrorism, that we are a well-governed country and a well-governed society.
That's it. Any questions?
Just one from me, Mr. Agent. Apart from the international scrutiny regarding these charities, are there any other measures that are going to be put in place to ensure or to scrutinize the accounting of these charities? For example, if there's a charity that has extremely high administrative costs as opposed to the costs for funds, the funds disbursed for the actual good of the charity, or the aim of the charity, are there any measures that are to come to guard against this?
Let me permit Minister Jordan. He wants to respond specifically, and then you can come back to me.
Yeah.
You move too fast.
Yeah.
You know, we need a little thing with wheels.
It's true.
Just
These
to
are
slide
the
it.
old things. The matter of governance in third sector organizations is one that has attracted the attention of government. We have been working with the Caribbean Policy Development Center, CPDC, which is a regional umbrella organization for the third sector. They have been working with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. They've prepared, after wide consultation, which included our ministry, a white paper which is titled A Call for NGO Legislation. The understanding coming out of that was that there is need to strengthen the sector. There is need to put the sector on a footing that makes it clear to the public that these are organizations that I can put my money in because they're well run, well managed, and what we were saying today, well regulated. We are in the process of preparing a cabinet paper. We use the white paper from CPDC, and we thank them for that. We're in the process of preparing a cabinet paper which will ask cabinet we've already committed to it in our manifesto, but we're asking cabinet formally to allow us to move forward in the creation of legislation which will include, among other things, the necessity to have financial statements prepared, either audited or reviewed, and published. Because it is imperative that there is credibility created in the sector. We want to be clear that the organizations that function in our jurisdiction, in our country, are credible. So the new NGO legislation, when it comes, will speak to the need to have those things done, filed, and placed on a register. And because they may not all be charities as listed and governed by the registrar, but all third sector organizations will be required to demonstrate their credibility through the provision to a government agency of audited or reviewed financial statements.
Time frame that you hope to accomplish this?
We are hoping that by middle of next calendar year, we're hoping that. But I have to tell you that the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel has been inundated. I mean, you must know, based on the frequency of our meetings of Parliament and the volume of bills that have been debated over the past 18 months, that the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel has been going almost flat out. So that what I give you in terms of the middle of next year is my desire, but it goes with all the other bills from all the other ministries that also are important. But that is my desire. I would say middle to third quarter of next calendar year.
Mr. Adrian, responding to the same question?
No, I'm comfortable with his response. Let me say though that on the question of basically what else is coming, whether in this sector or not. Barbados has worked tirelessly over the last 18 months to ensure that our rating, our current rating based on our last assessment in 2017 with the FATF is quite dismal. But in the last 18 months, we've put a tremendous amount of work in to try to transform how we regulate all of the Barbadian sectors. So when we talk about fighting money laundering and so on, it's not just banks and companies. It's also arrangements in relation to attorneys at law, real estate agents. So a whole raft of entities, of individuals, have to subject themselves now to a more intense supervisory framework. We often, let's be practical. In our economy, there is far less opportunity to have money laundering or terrorism financing arrangements in the same way as you could have in a larger economy. The Barbadian economy has just topped $5 billion in terms of money moving through its system. $5 billion is a medium-sized company in some parts of the world, but we don't get to be subject to different rules. We're subject to exactly the same rules as far bigger economies are subject to, and the entities that are coming under scrutiny in those jurisdictions are expected to be scrutinized similarly in the Barbadian situation. We are about to bring to Parliament a new piece of legislation to establish a compliance unit in the anti-money laundering agency, and that compliance unit will have the responsibility of doing supervision in respect of other entities that are not supervised. What I will say though, it's obvious to us that the goalposts keep changing. 10 years ago, all that you needed to do to satisfy all of the FATF requirements was to pass laws. So some countries passed the laws and checked off all those boxes. They then changed the goalposts to say passing laws isn't enough, you need to demonstrate effectiveness. And that is where, that's the fight that Barbados is engaging in now, how to fight effectiveness, how to demonstrate effectiveness. So for example, in the international, that's right. Yeah. So for example, if you look at how we are measured, the international community measures our effectiveness in money laundering not by looking to see whether we are successful in eliminating it, but by counting the number of money laundering cases that we have. So unless we are able to demonstrate that we have money laundering cases, that we are seizing assets and so on, then unfortunately they don't view us as being effective. But we've passed an awful lot of legislation to help with our compliance issues, and we are going to be in a face-to-face meeting with the FATF in January, and I expect that based on that we will have a better rating than we do now, but the goalposts are constantly changing. So in terms of what is to come, sometimes you have to say that you don't even know what is to come, because when those goalposts changes, we have to meet different requirements. And this is not just in the money laundering area. Minister Topping has been constantly trying to tweak our framework in areas so that we can respond to requirements of the OECD and of the EU, and they've been changing from time to time as well.
AG?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, but maybe to get the story correct, because we were told, most of us, I can assure you, we're being targeted. We were told we weren't person. So most of us came in the middle of this, and we don't have any correspondence, no one wanted to go.
Oh, okay.
So if you could just give us a little
We don't want to get from
A little
James.
recap.
Huh?
No, that's all right.
So we get the story.
Okay.
We come in the middle of it and not
No, that's
sure
all right.
what-
No. Okay. I'm not sure which middle you had, so let me just begin by saying that today the Joint Select Committee on the Integrity and Public Life Bill completed its work. That's item one. You didn't get any of that,
No.
but you can get that from the recording, right? So that's one. Okay? What that means is that when Parliament next sits, which will be Tuesday 17th, we will be carrying back to Parliament a report of the Select Committee together with a new and finished bill. I shouldn't say new because it is based on the old bill, okay? But that work is now complete. I felt it was important that the public be aware that that work is completed because the committee last met on the 3rd of December. So it's been a year since the committee started to then work on the drafting and the redrafting and so on, just to try to get get what is here now in a state that works for everyone. So that's been a year-long process. Second part of that is that World Corruption Day is the 9th of December. And we had hoped to be able to get this bill back to Parliament before World Corruption Day. But as I said, it's going to be happening on the 17th. The third part of that is that we expect before the end of the year to finally sign the UN Convention on Corruption. Okay, so those three things are together. Part two relates to the notice which was put in the press on Wednesday, which indicated that various charities would find themselves, the notice said the following charities which are registered and they're listed. And then it goes on, the Registrar of Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property advises that unless the default is remedied. Now, the default is that in August of this year, the Corporate Affairs Department wrote to every single charity in Barbados, all 1,400 of them, and asked them to complete a questionnaire. The reason for the questionnaire is that since the Charities Act was enacted in 1979, there's been no supervision of any charity. You set up a charity and it's on its own, okay? There's been absolutely no supervision. But because of the AML-CFT, anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regime, we have to tighten up on that regime simply because, on the regime of supervision, simply because charities are internationally considered to be high risk in relation to money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Okay? Simply because there's little supervision anyway. You set up a charity and you do what you want to do with it. Nobody supervises what they do. Nobody discloses who the beneficiaries are, who sends money, who it goes to. So for that reason, it's high risk. We have 1,400 of them without any supervision at all since 1979. And because of the scrutiny by the FATF, we have to tighten up on this. Problem is that when we wrote all 1,400 in August, only 100 of them responded to the questionnaire. So we wrote again in September, okay, saying, please respond to the questionnaire. A similarly small number responded. Now, while we have no doubt that these entities are legitimate, they may be not functioning, we don't believe that they're engaged in money laundering or financial terrorism, but the point is, part of a supervisor's responsibility is to know, and you can only know if people respond to the questionnaire. So in a situation where of 1,400, only 100 respond, given that the sector is high risk, and again, I repeat, I mean high risk in accordance with the international standard, not high risk in our domestic media. But because it's high risk, the registry had to ramp up its mechanics in terms of getting these charities to respond. Those charities that are not functioning, over time I have no doubt that they'll be struck off because there's no point keeping them there, and I don't even think that the trustees of the charities would have any objection. Those charities that are actually functioning The supervisors, they need to know which charities are functioning and what it is that they're doing. There's been no complaints with our legislative requirement in Section 41 and 42 of the Charities Act, which requires charities to keep accounts and to file those accounts. That is not happening, and we need really just to regularize that situation. Charities, however, when they see this ad, is like if my name appeared in the papers, okay, you begin to panic. Oh my God, have I done something wrong? Have we broken some law? That is not the case, and it's unfortunate that that panic might have been engendered, but I think you will agree that where you write and only 100 or 1,400 respond, you write again and only another 100 or 1,400 respond, we simply needed to ramp up to make these entities aware that they have to comply with certain regulatory frameworks. All right.
What specifically are the questions in your survey?
It is available on the KIPO website, so you can take a look at it. kipo.gov.bb. Yeah?
Mr. AG?
Yes, sir. It just requires you to give contact information, to update the contact information. So, for example, the charity that was set up in there's some of them, I've seen some files, charity set up in 1990. And when you look, the charity is still on the book, but every single trustee has gone into the great beyond. But it is still on the books. It still exists. We need an update on who the trustees are, purposes of the charity. Is there any affiliation with global bodies? We never had to ask that question before. But now we're forced to ask, you, sir, do you have any affiliation with any global bodies outside? Because there are some entities, if we see that you are affiliated to, then we have to put you into another risk category. Okay? So that's what they're asking. And also, how you're getting your money. Some are getting it from cake sales, some are getting it from car washes and barbecues, but others are getting it through contributions from international sources. So again, we need to look to see what is that source, and is there any connection between that source and any of the UN listed terrorist organizations and so on. Okay? Good.